The hum of the Rolls-Royce engines was a lullaby for the privileged sound that promised a seamless journey across the Atlantic. In seat 2A of Transatlantic Royal Airways first class cabin, a woman gazed out at the clouds, her reflection a fleeting ghost against the deep blue of the stratosphere. She was a portrait of understated elegance, a study in quiet power. But to the crew, she was invisible, a glitch in their carefully curated world of champagne flutes and obsequious smiles. They saw her, but they didn't see her. And in their calculated ignorance, they made a catastrophic mistake. They denied her a glass of champagne, unaware that the name on the bottle, the very vintage they were pouring for everyone else, was hers. They were about to learn that karma doesn't just fly coach. Sometimes it sits in first class, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to deplane. The scent of leather and lavender-infused hot towels filled the exclusive enclave of the Tara Boeing 711's first-class cabin. Dr. Alistair Vance settled into her suite, a private cocoon of cream-colored upholstery and polished burled wood. The journey from New York to London was a familiar one, a necessary commute in her line of work, but tonight it held a particular significance. The meeting awaiting her in Mayfair could redefine the future of her company, a culmination of a decade of relentless passion and sacrifice. She slipped off her Ferragamo loafers and stretched her legs, the soft cashmere of her travel suit, a gentle armor against the world. At 42, Alistair carried an aura of profound calm, a stillness forged in boardrooms and vineyards alike. Her mind was a whirlwind of figures, projections, and the delicate notes of her presentation, but her posture was one of serene repose. She was a master of duality. The lead flight attendant, a woman with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Brenda, moved through the cabin with an air of proprietary authority. Her smile was a practiced, perfect arc, deployed with strategic precision. It landed warmly on the silver-haired gentleman in 1A, a known tech mogul, and lingered on the actress in 3D, her face recognizable from a recent blockbuster. When her gaze swept over Alistair, however, it was as if it hit a pane of clear glass. No purchase, no recognition, just a flicker of something. It wasn't overt hostility, but a subtle chilling subtraction of warmth. An assumption. A younger male attendant, Keith, trailed in Brenda's wake, his movements eager and slightly uncoordinated. He offered pre-departure beverages. "Orange juice water, madam," he asked Alistair, his tone polite but rote. "I'll wait until we're in the air, thank you," Alistair replied, her voice a low, melodic contralto. Brenda materialized at her side moments later, holding the wine list. "The menu for our flight, doctor," she said, her use of the title feeling less like respect and more like a performative act she was required to execute. Alistair took the leather-bound menu, her fingers tracing the embossed gold logo of Transatlantic Royal Airways. She already knew what she wanted. She'd seen the press release weeks ago, a small thrill running through her, when Tara announced its new exclusive champagne for its first-class service. Flipping to the beverage section, she saw it nestled between a Dom Perignon and a Krug, her creation, her family's legacy distilled into a bottle of bubbling salmon-hued perfection. Maison Aurée was her life's work, a boutique vineyard she had transformed from a local secret in the French countryside into a globally recognized symbol of black-owned luxury. Having it served on one of the world's premier airlines was a monumental victory. A quiet smile touched her lips. She would celebrate tonight. After takeoff, as the jet leveled off into its cruising altitude, the cabin came alive with the soft clinking of cutlery and glass. Brenda approached Alistair, her order pad poised. "Can I get you something to drink before the meal service?" "Doctor, yes." "Thank you," Alistair said, her eyes bright with anticipation. I would love a glass of the Maison Ori rose. Brenda's smile didn't falter, but a strange, hard glint appeared in her eyes. She paused for a fraction of a second too long. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice dripping with synthetic regret. "We seem to be having a stock issue on this flight. I don't believe we have any of the Ori available this evening. May I suggest the Dom Perignon instead? It's a very popular choice." Alistair's smile faded. "A stock issue on the flagship route from JFK to Heathrow. Unlikely. Are you certain?" she asked, keeping her tone even. "I was very much looking forward to it." "Quite certain," Brenda replied, her tone brooking no argument. "The loading team must have made an error." The Dom Perignon. Alistair felt a familiar, weary pang. It was the soft, polite wall of dismissal she had encountered countless times in her life. The casual lie designed to manage and redirect, predicated on the assumption that she wouldn't know any better, wouldn't push back, wouldn't belong. "No, thank you," she said quietly. "Just water for now." Brenda gave a tight nod and swept away, her mission of gatekeeping apparently complete. Alistair leaned her head back against the seat, the gentle hum of the engines now sounding like a mocking laugh. Across the aisle she watched Brenda approach the man in 2B. He conferred with his wife, and then Brenda turned, reaching into the wine chiller. Alistair watched her heart, a cold, heavy stone in her chest, as Brenda expertly uncorked a bottle. The label was unmistakable, the elegant gold leaf script shimmering under the cabin lights. Maison Ori. Brenda poured 2 flutes of the delicate rosé, the bubbles rising in a joyous, effervescent stream. She served them to the couple with a flourish and a genuine, effusive smile. "A wonderful choice," she murmured loud enough for Alistair to hear. "It's our newest addition. Simply divine." The lie wasn't just a lie, it was a declaration, a public erasure. Alistair Vance sat in her gilded cage, invisible, as the flight attendant served another passenger a glass of her own triumph. The first sip of ice water felt like swallowing shards of glass. Alistair set the crystal tumbler down her hand, perfectly steady, betraying none of the cold fury coiling in her gut. She was not a woman prone to outbursts. Her power lay in observation, in strategy, in allowing others to reveal the full depth of their character before she made a single move. And Brenda Holloway was revealing herself with every polished step. Alistair watched the performance unfold. Brenda refilled the couple's glasses with more aura, chatting amiably about its crisp notes of red currant and brioche. Alistair could have recited the tasting notes from memory. She'd spent months perfecting that balance with her vintner, Jean-Pierre in Reims. To hear her own words, her own soul parroted by the woman who had just denied her its existence, was a surreal out-of-body experience. She decided to try a different approach. Perhaps the younger attendant, Keith, was merely an unwilling accomplice. When he passed by a few minutes later, collecting appetizer plates, Alistair caught his eye. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but firm. Keith startled, as if surprised to be addressed. "Yes, madam, I believe there may have been a misunderstanding earlier." Alistair began, giving him a chance, an out. "I would still very much like a glass of the Maison Ori champagne." Keith's face, youthful and open a moment before, clouded with a rehearsed panic. He glanced nervously toward the galley where Brenda was stationed. About that. I'm very sorry, but Brenda mentioned we're reserved." Reserved, Alistair repeated the word, hanging in the air, utterly nonsensical. "The entire stock is reserved. On a 7-hour flight for our, platinum medallion flyers." He stammered the lie, clumsy and ill-fitting in his mouth. He couldn't meet her gaze, his eyes darting to a point somewhere over her shoulder. "It's a new airline policy. I'm terribly sorry. I can get you anything else." It was worse than Brenda's lie. It was a hastily constructed, insulting fiction. Alistair was a platinum medallion flyer and had been for 6 consecutive years. Her status was clearly printed on her boarding pass. Keith's fumbling attempt to reinforce the barricade Brenda had erected was pathetic, and in a way more painful. He was a foot soldier in an army of casual prejudice, too weak or too intimidated to question his commanding officer. "I see," Alistair said, the 2 words carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken accusations. "Thank you, Keith." She dismissed him with a nod, and he practically fled down the aisle. The gentleman in seat 2B, who had been enjoying his second glass of Ori, had been observing the exchange. He was a man in his late 50s, with kind eyes and a well-tailored suit, a Mr. Peterson, according to a luggage tag Alistair had briefly seen. He leaned slightly across the aisle. "Excuse me for intruding," he said in a low, conspiratorial tone. "But is everything all right?" I couldn't help but overhear. "They're really telling you they don't have this." He gestured with his flute. "It's excellent, by the way. My wife loves it." Alistair offered him a small, weary smile. "So I've heard. I mean, I saw her serve me from a fresh bottle." He continued, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "If you'd like, I can call her over and—" "No," Alistair interrupted gently. "Please don't. Enjoy your drink. This isn't about the champagne." Mr. Peterson looked at her, truly looked at her, and a flicker of understanding dawned in his eyes. He saw the elegant black woman sitting alone, being stone-walled by the cabin crew. He saw the subtle, ugly mechanics of the situation clicking into place. The injustice of it settled on his face. That's not right," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "It isn't," Alistair agreed. "But your intervention would only allow them to frame this as a simple misunderstanding. It's important sometimes to let a thing be exactly what it is." He nodded slowly, comprehending her meaning. He was witnessing a quiet, contained act of bigotry, and Alistair was not going to allow them the easy escape of a quick fix. She was going to let them sit in the silence of their decision, to let their prejudice echo off the walls of the cabin, unheard by them, but deafening to her. She pulled her laptop from her briefcase, the cool metal a comforting, solid presence. She would not allow them to ruin her focus. The London presentation was paramount. But as she began to review her slides, her mind kept drifting back to the bubbles in Mr. Peterson's glass. Each one seemed like a tiny, effervescent taunt. She thought of her grandfather, who had bought the small, struggling plot of land in France after the war, a black American soldier who fell in love with the soil and the possibility it held. She thought of her father, who had nurtured it against all odds, battling skepticism and racism from the established French vintners. And she thought of herself, pouring her MBA and her life savings into building Maison Auré, into a brand that could and should stand beside the titans of the industry. This wasn't just a slight, it was a desecration of that legacy. And as the plane sped through the darkness, 30,000 feet above an indifferent ocean, Alistair Vance made a decision. This would not end with a forgotten complaint form. This would end with a reckoning. An hour passed. The main course was served and cleared. Brenda and Keith moved with a choreographed avoidance of Alistair's suite, their attention lavished on everyone else. The politeness was now a weapon, a form of aggressive neglect. Each time Brenda passed her back, ramrod straight, Alistair felt the deliberate chill. It was a masterclass in making someone feel like an intruder in a space for which they had paid a small fortune. Alistair knew that direct confrontation with the initial aggressors was futile. They were fortified in their righteousness. To effect change, one had to go up the chain of command. With a calm, deliberate press, she activated the call button above her seat. The small chime was a polite electronic request, but in the tense cabin, it sounded like a gunshot. It took nearly 5 minutes for a response, Not Brenda or Keith, but a tall, thin man with receding grey hair and a sour expression appeared at her side. His name tag identified him as Gregory Finch, the cabin purser. He was the highest authority on the flight. Yes, he asked, his tone clipped, suggesting her summons was an inconvenience. "Good evening, Gregory," Alistair said, her voice even and professional. "I'm Dr. Vance in 2A. I'm having a bit of an issue I was hoping you could resolve." An issue he repeated, as if the concept were foreign, in his perfectly managed cabin. "Yes. Earlier I requested a glass of the Maison Auray champagne, which is advertised on your menu. I was told first that it was out of stock, and then that it was reserved. However, I've since watched it be served to multiple other passengers in this cabin. I'd like to understand why I am being denied a service that is being offered to others." She laid out the facts, simply without emotion or accusation, letting their starkness speak for itself. Gregory Finch's face tightened. He shot a venomous glare toward the galley, clearly unhappy about being pulled into a dispute with a passenger. His loyalty, Alistair knew instantly, would be to his crew. "I assure you there must be a misunderstanding," he said, his voice a condescending balm. "Brenda is our most experienced flight attendant. If she said there was a stock issue, there was likely a stock issue at the time you asked. Perhaps another bottle was located later. A bottle was located within 2 minutes of my request and served to the gentleman across the aisle." Alistair countered, refusing to let him gaslight her. "And your other attendant, Keith, invented a policy about it being reserved for certain status members, a status which I hold." Gregory's composure cracked. He was not accustomed to passengers who came with receipts. "Now, madam," he began, his voice taking on a patronizing edge. "We are very busy. I'm sure my crew is doing the best they can. Flying is a stressful experience for everyone." It was the classic deflection. Frame her as emotional, as stressed as an unreliable narrator of her own experience. "I am not stressed, Gregory. I am simply requesting a beverage that is part of the first-class service I paid for." He sighed, a long theatrical exhalation of manufactured patience. "Look, I don't know what to tell you. Perhaps there was a specific request for that champagne tied to another passenger's booking. These things can get complicated. As a gesture of goodwill, I'd be happy to offer you a complimentary bottle of the Dom Perignon to enjoy." He was offering her a bribe to be quiet, a replacement he deemed equivalent or superior, entirely missing the point. It was never about the champagne. It was about the lie. It was about the reason why the lie was told to her. This was the moment. The point of no return. With a fluid, almost imperceptible movement, Alistair picked up her phone from the console beside her. She discreetly unlocked it and tapped the audio recording app. She placed it back on the console screen down. "I'm afraid that's not acceptable," she said, her voice now carrying a new steely resonance. "Let me be very clear so we are both on the same page. My name is Dr. Alistair Vance." "Could you please state your full name and title for me?" Again, Gregory blinked, thrown off by the sudden formality. "Gregory Finch. I'm the cabin purser." "Thank you, Gregory Alistair," said, her gaze unwavering. "And can you confirm for me that it is the official policy of Transatlantic Royal Airways to refuse a listed menu item to one first-class passenger, while simultaneously serving it to another?" The question, so direct and legalistic, hung in the air between them. Gregory's face paled slightly. He could see the abyss opening up before him. Admitting the truth would be an admission of discriminatory service. Lying would be a direct contradiction of observable reality. He was trapped. "That is not our policy," he stammered, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. This is a simple mix-up. Then please rectify this mix-up and have one of your attendants bring me a glass of the Maison Oreille rose." It was checkmate. For a long moment, Gregory just stood there, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. He was a man whose authority had been dismantled piece by piece with quiet, unassailable logic. He turned on his heel without another word and marched back to the galley. Alistair did not feel a sense of triumph. She felt a profound and soul-deep exhaustion. The turbulence she was feeling had nothing to do with the air currents outside the plane and everything to do with the corrosive atmosphere within it. A few minutes later, Keith appeared at her elbow, his hands trembling slightly. He placed a freshly poured, bubbling flute of salmon-pink champagne on her console. "Your champagne, Dr. Vance?" he whispered, refusing to make eye contact. He scurried away before she could say a word. Alistair looked at the glass. It was the physical embodiment of her struggle, a victory that felt bitter and hollow. She picked it up, the crystal cool against her fingertips. She held it to the light, watching her own legacy sparkle back at her. And then, without taking a single sip, she placed it back on the console, where it would sit untouched for the remainder of the flight. The statement had been made. The rest of the flight was conducted in a state of frigid, unspoken warfare. The cabin crew performed their duties with robotic efficiency, but a 5-foot bubble of personal space was maintained around Alistair's suite at all times. They were terrified of her, and she, in turn, was utterly finished with them. She focused on her work, refining the final slides of her presentation and immersing herself in market analysis. It was her sanctuary, a world of logic and numbers where prejudice had no place. As the passengers began to settle in for the night, the cabin lights dimmed. From the corner of her eye, Alistair could see the galley where Brenda and Gregory were engaged in a hushed, frantic conversation. Their gestures were sharp, their expressions angry. Brenda's arrogance had been replaced by a brittle defensiveness. She had been overruled, her authority challenged and broken, and she was clearly blaming everyone but herself. Keith hovered nervously at the edge of their conference, looking like a schoolboy awaiting punishment. Alistair didn't need to hear the words to know their substance, a mix of damage control, indignation, and a complete failure to comprehend the gravity of their actions. They likely saw her as a difficult passenger, a complainer, never once considering the root cause of the difficulty. Before he settled into sleep, Mr. Peterson from 2B caught Alistair's eye once more. He discreetly walked over, pretending to stretch his legs. He slipped a business card onto a console. "Charles Peterson," he said quietly. "I'm a partner at a law firm. What they did was not just poor service. It has legal implications. If you decide to take this further, I would be more than willing to provide a statement as a witness to the entire affair. My wife would as well. Just give my office a call. Thank you, Charles Alistair," said the unexpected solidarity, a small balm on a raw wound. "That means a great deal." "No one should be treated that way," he affirmed with a firm nod before returning to his seat. Alistair looked down at the card. Peterson, Davies and Finch, a top-tier litigation firm. Another piece of the puzzle was clicking into place. She opened a new email on her laptop. She did not address it to Tara's generic customer service portal, which she knew was a black hole for complaints. This email was for her own team. The recipient list was small and precise. Benjamin, her business partner, and COO, and the head of her legal counsel. The subject line was simple: incident on Tara Flight 712, JFK to LHR. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She did not write with anger or emotion. She wrote like a lawyer preparing a brief. She detailed the timeline of events with meticulous precision, the initial request at 1940 GMT Brenda Holloway's claim of no stock, the subsequent serving of Maison Oreille to passengers in 2B and 2C, at 19:45 GMT. Her second request to Keith at 20:15 GMT and his fabricated policy. Her summons of purser Gregory Finch at 21:05 GMT. She then transcribed almost verbatim her recorded conversation, with Gregory noting his deflections, his condescension, and his ultimate begrudging compliance. She attached the audio file a small, damning piece of digital evidence. She concluded the email with a clear directive. Benjamin, please have legal draft a formal letter. We are not seeking compensation or an apology at this stage. We are putting them on notice. The letter should detail this incident as a clear instance of discriminatory service and a potential breach of contract for carriage. It should also reference the reputational damage to the Maison Aurae brand by having its quality implicitly and explicitly denied to a paying customer by the airline's own staff. Hold the letter. Do not send it yet. I will advise on the timing after my meeting in London. Let's see how things unfold. She hit send. The small swoosh sound of the email departing was to her the true uncorking. It wasn't the pop of a champagne bottle, but the release of a carefully aimed, strategically timed missile. She had documented the facts. She had a recording. She had a witness, a partner at a litigation firm, no less. She had built her case, just as she had built her business with patience, precision, and an unshakable belief in the value of her position. She finally glanced at the untouched flute of champagne still sitting on her console. The bubbles had long since died. It was just a glass of still pink liquid, now a silent testament to the evening's sour proceedings. With a quiet sigh, she took a photo of it with her phone, the Tara logo on the napkin, beneath it, clearly visible. Another piece of evidence. Then she settled back in her seat, closed her eyes, and against all odds, fell into a deep and dreamless sleep. The grey pearlescent light of a London dawn was breaking as Alistair's car glided through the waking city toward the Connaught Hotel in Mayfair. The flight was a memory, a bad taste she had mentally rinsed away. Today was about the future. It was about the London Accord. The meeting was with the acquisitions board of the Elysian Hotel Group, a global behemoth of luxury hospitality with 5-star properties from Tokyo to Monaco. They were looking for a new exclusive champagne partner for their suites and VIP lounges. Landing this contract would not just be a financial windfall, it would catapult Maison Aurae into the stratosphere of elite luxury brands. It was the kind of deal that could secure her family's legacy for generations. She walked into the boardroom at 10 a.m. sharp. The room was intimidating, a long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine, surrounded by a dozen stern-faced executives, men and women who controlled billions in assets. Alistair was not intimidated. She was in her element. "Good morning," she began, her voice, calm and confident, filling the room. "My name is Dr. Alistair Vance, and it is my honor to introduce you to Maison Aurae." For the next hour, she held them captive. She didn't just sell them champagne, she told them a story. She started with a black-and-white photograph of her grandfather, a young GI standing proud on a small, unassuming patch of French soil in 1946. She spoke of his dream to cultivate something beautiful in a world still scarred by war. She showed them pictures of her father, his hands stained with the dirt of the vineyard, teaching her how to listen to the grapes. Then she unveiled her vision. She explained how she took that rustic heritage and infused it with modern science and branding, earning her PhD in oenology, not for the title, but for the knowledge to perfect her craft. She spoke of sustainability of community, of building a brand that was not just about luxury, but about a story of resilience, excellence, and unexpected origins. Maison Aurae, she explained, her passion evident in every word, is built on a principle of delightful surprise. It is the unexpected discovery of perfection. When you taste our Cuvée Céleste, you are not just tasting champagne. You are tasting the culmination of a 75-year-old dream. You are tasting the defiance of expectations. Finally, she poured the champagne. As the executives took their first sips, a hush fell over the room. They swirled, they sniffed, they tasted. Alistair watched their faces, seeing the flicker of surprise, the nod of appreciation, the slow smiles of connoisseurs who had just discovered something truly special. The chairman of the board, a formidable Brit named Sir Reginald Croft, held his glass up to the light. "Remarkable, Dr. Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble of approval. "Truly remarkable. It has the complexity of a vintage Krug, but a freshness that is entirely its own." The questions that followed were about logistics volume and pricing, but Alistair knew she had already won. She had sold them the story, and the product had sealed the deal. By noon the handshakes were firm, the smiles genuine. The Elysian Hotel Group wanted Maison Aurée exclusively for a 5-year term. The contract was worth tens of millions of dollars. As she left the boardroom, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Benjamin. "They're signing. Champagne for everyone tonight." Alistair smiled and typed a reply. "Excellent. And Ben, it's time. Send the letter to Tara." Walking out into the cool London air, Alistair felt a profound sense of vindication. In the space of 12 hours, she had been treated as an invisible nuisance, unworthy of a glass of her own champagne, and had also single-handedly secured a landmark deal that would place that very same champagne in the hands of the global elite. The juxtaposition was dizzying, a stark illustration of the two worlds she was forced to navigate, one where her worth was constantly questioned, and another where her brilliance was undeniable. The karma she felt was already beginning to brew. It was now just a matter of serving it at the correct temperature. Robert Stanfield, the CEO of Transatlantic Royal Airways, was a man who hated surprises. His world was one of predictable flight paths, quarterly earnings reports, and carefully managed public relations. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, his predictable world was about to be obliterated. The first tremor came not from Alistair's letter, but from a press release. His head of corporate partnerships, a sharp woman named Amelia, forwarded him an article from the Financial Times. Elysian Hotel Group announces exclusive partnership with boutique vintner Maison Aurée. Stanfield skimmed the article. He knew the Elysian Group well. They were one of Tara's most important corporate accounts, spending millions annually on travel for their top executives. The article praised Elysian for its forward-thinking choice, highlighting the compelling story of Maison Aurée's founder, Dr. Alistair Vance, and celebrating the rise of a black-owned brand in a traditionally white European industry. "Good for them," Stanfield muttered about to close the email. "We should send a congratulatory note." And Amelia didn't. "We just put this Aura champagne in our first-class service." "Yes," Robert, Amelia's voice said over the intercom. "It's been getting rave reviews. A real coup for our beverage director to get it." Stanfield nodded, satisfied. Tara was ahead of the curve, associated with a rising, diverse luxury brand that their biggest client now championed. It was a perfect synergy. He felt a moment of corporate pride. That moment lasted for exactly 90 seconds. His executive assistant buzzed through. "Mr. Stanfield, a priority letter just arrived by courier for you from the legal counsel of a Maison Aurée. It's marked strictly confidential and urgent." A cold knot formed in Stanfield's stomach. The name twice in 5 minutes was no coincidence. "Send it in." The letter was printed on heavy cream-colored bond paper, the language precise, cold, and devastating. Stanfield read it once, then a second time, his face growing paler with each sentence. It laid out the events of Flight 712, in excruciating factual detail. It named Brenda Holloway Keith and purser Gregory Finch. It referenced a witness, a partner at a litigation firm. And it mentioned with chilling understatement an audio recording of the purser's interaction with their client. The client. Dr. Alistair Vance. The Financial Times article was still open on his screen. The photograph accompanying it showed a poised, smiling black woman holding a flute of champagne. The founder. The woman his crew had just systematically humiliated. The new celebrated partner of his airline's largest corporate client. The karma algorithm had finished its calculation, and the result was catastrophic. Amelia. He roared into the intercom. Get me the full flight manifest and crew roster for Tara 712 from JFK on September 5th. Get me the head of in-flight services. Get me our general counsel. Get them all in my office, now. The panic was immediate and absolute. This was not a standard customer complaint that could be solved with a few thousand air miles and a form letter apology. This was a 5-alarm corporate fire with the potential to burn down everything. The first issue was the blatant discrimination. In the current social climate, a story like this going public would be a PR nightmare from which they might never recover. The brand damage would be immense. The second and perhaps more immediate issue was the business relationship. Sir Reginald Croft of the Elysian Group was notoriously principled. If he learned that the airline he partnered with had treated his new, hand-picked supplier in such a despicable manner, he could pull their multi-million-dollar account without a second thought. Stanfield's team scrambled. Within the hour, they had the details. They pulled the passenger list. Dr. Alistair Vance, seat 2A, Executive Platinum Medallion, booking confirmed and paid in full. They cross-referenced the witness Charles Peterson, seat 2B. A quick search confirmed he was a senior litigation partner, specializing in corporate malfeasance. They were in deep, deep trouble. What were they thinking? Stanfield fumed, pacing his office. What could possibly possess a crew to behave this way? His head of in-flight services, a veteran who had seen it all, answered grimly. They weren't thinking, Robert. They were acting on instinct, an ugly, baked-in prejudice. They saw a black woman in a seat they felt she didn't belong in, and they decided to put her in her place. They just happened to pick a woman who could dismantle this entire airline with a single phone call. The gears of the corporate machine began to grind. The flight was due to land back at JFK in 2 hours. Stanfield gave a single, cold order. Have security meet the plane. Escort Brenda Holloway, Keith and Gregory Finch to separate interview rooms at the corporate headquarters. They are not to speak to each other. Confiscate their company IDs. They are suspended effective immediately pending investigation. And somebody get me a personal phone number for Dr. Alistair Vance. I don't care how you get it. Find it. The reckoning was no longer a distant storm cloud. It had made landfall. Brenda Holloway spent the return flight from London in a state of simmering indignation. In the 30 years she had patrolled the aisles of various aircraft, she had developed a sixth sense for problem passengers. They came in all forms, but the most difficult were the new money types, the ones who felt a first-class ticket entitled them to rewrite the rules. This Dr. Vance, in Brenda's carefully constructed narrative, was a classic case, quietly demanding, self-important, and clearly looking for a reason to complain, probably to angle for a hefty compensation voucher. Brenda had already composed the incident report in her head. It was a masterpiece of corporate jargon painting, Vance as disruptive to cabin harmony and herself as a model of professional de-escalation. She felt secure, cocooned in the righteousness of seniority and procedure. The descent into JFK was smooth. As she prepared the cabin for landing, she exchanged a knowing glance with Gregory Finch. They had closed ranks, their story unified. Keith was a nervous wreck, but he would fall in line. They were the airline. They held the power. That illusion shattered the moment she stepped onto the jet bridge. The sight of two impassive corporate security officers and the JFK station manager waiting specifically for them was a splash of icy water. There were no greetings, no pleasantries. Brenda Holloway, Gregory Finch, Keith Miller. The station manager asked, his voice flat. "Please come with us." They were separated from the rest of the crew and led through a series of back corridors, a silent, ominous procession that ended at a fleet of black sedans waiting on the tarmac. The professional world they knew, with its hierarchies and unspoken rules, had been inverted. They were no longer crew. They were suspects. At Tara's imposing corporate headquarters near the airport, they were placed in 3 separate sterile interview rooms. The rooms were identical: a small table, 2 chairs, and a single tinted window that was clearly a 2-way mirror. Brenda sat ramrod straight, her fury battling a rising tide of panic. A man in a suit from Human Resources entered his face, unreadable. He began with simple questions about the flight, and Brenda launched into her prepared narrative. She was poised, confident, her words dripping with professional concern. "And so, given the passengers' increasingly agitated state, my purser and I made the decision to acquiesce to her demand to avoid any further disruption to the premium cabin experience," she concluded, folding her hands neatly on the table. The HR man listened patiently, then slid a glossy folder across the table. He opened it to a page featuring a press photograph of a smiling, elegant black woman. "Is this the passenger in question?" "Yes, that's her," Brenda confirmed. "Can you please read the caption for me?" Brenda leaned forward, her eyes scanning the text. "Dr. Alistair Vance, founder and CEO of the celebrated champagne house Maison Auray, announces a landmark partnership." The words blurred. Maison Auray. The founder. The blood drained from Brenda's face. The entire architecture of her self-righteousness collapsed in an instant. It wasn't a random, difficult passenger. It was the creator of the very product at the center of the dispute. Her lie wasn't just a lie. It was an insult of spectacular, catastrophic ignorance. She had told the Queen she was not welcome in her own castle. In the next room, Gregory Finch was attempting a different strategy: bureaucratic deflection. He spoke of fluid stocking situations, discretionary service protocols, and managing passenger expectations. He subtly tried to shift the blame onto Brenda's on-the-ground decision-making. Ultimately, the lead flight attendant makes the initial call, he explained smoothly. My role as purser was to intervene and resolve the situation, which I did by ensuring the passenger eventually received her requested beverage. "And what did you say to her during this intervention?" Mr. Finch, the interviewer, asked. Gregory recounted a sanitized version of their conversation. The interviewer let him finish, then pressed a small button on a speakerphone. Alistair's voice filled the room, clear as a bell from the audio recording. "Could you please state your full name and title for me?" Again followed by his own flustered, stammering responses. Gregory Finch slumped in his chair, his face ashen. He had been caught not just in a lie, but in his own condescending, inadequate words. Keith's interview was the shortest. The young man was visibly trembling. When the interviewer simply asked him to tell the truth about the Maison Auray, he burst into a confession, the words tumbling out in a torrent of fear and regret. He recounted Brenda's explicit instruction to lie the invented policy and the palpable tension in the cabin. He was a foot soldier confessing the sins of his general. While the interviews were concluding, Robert Stanfield presided over an emergency meeting in the Tara War Room. His general counsel, head of PR and head of in-flight services, sat around the table, their faces grim. "This is a multi-front disaster," the PR head said, rubbing his temples. The discrimination angle is radioactive. The business angle with Elysian could cost us our biggest corporate account. And we have a named witness who is a senior partner at a top litigation firm. She's built an ironclad case against us without even filing a suit. As if on cue, Stanfield's assistant entered and handed him a tablet. "Sir, an email just came through forwarded from legal. It's a formal statement from a Charles Peterson." Stanfield read the statement aloud. It was a clinical damning account corroborating every detail of Alistair's version of events. It was the final irrefutable piece of evidence. The room fell silent. "There's no other option," Stanfield said, his voice cold as ice. "This isn't a mistake. It's a cancer in our service culture, and we have to cut it out. Now." He looked at his head of in-flight services. "Terminate all 3 of them. Effective immediately. For gross misconduct causing irreparable brand and financial damage. I want their company credentials revoked before they leave this building." Later that evening, Stanfield sat alone in his vast office, the city lights glittering below. He had the file with Alistair's personal number. Making this call felt more daunting than announcing $1 billion loss to shareholders. He dialed, his heart pounding. "Dr. Vance," he began when she answered. "This is Robert Stanfield, CEO of Transatlantic Royal Airways. I am calling to offer you my most profound and sincere apology for the utterly disgraceful treatment you received on our flight." He heard only silence on the other end, and pressed on the words coming from a place of genuine corporate terror and dawning personal shame. There are no excuses for what happened. It was a failure at every level, and it represents a sickness within our corporate culture that I am now, thanks to you, forced to confront. The employees involved have had their contracts terminated, but I know that is not enough. This is not something that can be fixed by firing 3 people. No, it cannot. Alistair's calm voice finally replied, the sound cutting through his frantic apology. "I have read about your career, your brand. What you have built," Stanfield said. "To have my own staff insult you with your own product is a level of corporate failure that is almost poetic in its awfulness. I am not calling to offer you miles or vouchers. I am calling to ask what we can do to begin to make this right. Not just for you, but for every single person who might face this kind of prejudice when they travel with us." This was the opening Alistair had been waiting for. It was never about punishment. It was about change. "Your entire diversity, equity, and inclusion program is a failure, Robert," she said plainly. "It's a check-the-box exercise that does nothing to address implicit bias. You need to scrap it and start over. I can recommend a consulting firm that specializes in genuine systemic change. I want you to hire them. I want you to commit publicly to a complete overhaul of your in-flight service training from top to bottom." "Done," Stanfield said without hesitation. And Alistair continued, "I want Tara to make a substantial 7-figure donation to Vintners of Tomorrow, a foundation I established that provides scholarships and mentorship for minority students pursuing careers in oenology and hospitality. See it as an investment. You will help build the diverse future you have so far failed to recognize." "Done," Stanfield repeated, relief flooding his voice. "Dr. Vance, thank you. You have every right to destroy our reputation, and instead you are offering us a chance to rebuild it properly." "Everyone deserves a chance to be better," Robert Alistair said. "My life's work is about creating something of quality and proving that excellence knows no color. All I ever asked was for a glass of champagne. But what I am demanding now is respect. For me and for everyone who looks like me." 6 months later, the Tara Sovereign Lounge at JFK was an oasis of hushed tones, and the gentle clinking of porcelain. Alistair Vance sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the ballet of ground crews on the tarmac below. She was flying to London again this time to personally oversee the launch of the Maison Auray experience at the Elysian's flagship hotel. She could have flown any airline. Her company's soaring success and the Elysian partnership meant private jets were now an option. Yet she had deliberately booked Seat 2A on Transatlantic Royal Airways Flight SIFN-12. It was not a gesture of forgiveness, but of inspection. An audit. Robert Stanfield had kept his word. The consulting firm she recommended had been hired, and their work had been ruthless and comprehensive. Tara's entire service manual had been rewritten. Hundreds of hours of new training had been implemented. The 7-figure donation to her foundation had been received and was already funding the education of a new generation of diverse talent. Stanfield sent her quarterly progress reports, detailed and transparent. On paper, the change was real. But Alistair knew that culture wasn't changed by memos. It was changed in moments in the spaces between people. She was here to test the integrity of those spaces. When she boarded, the cabin was the same familiar landscape of cream and polished wood. But the atmosphere was different. A new lead flight attendant, a graceful woman named Annika, with warm, intelligent eyes, greeted her at the door. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Vance, Annika," said her smile genuine and unforced. "We are so honored to have you with us this evening. Your suite is ready for you." There was no performative deference, just a quiet, professional respect. As Alistair settled into her seat, she found a small handwritten note waiting on the console resting beside the menu. The stationery was thick, embossed with the CEO's insignia. "Dr. Vance," it read, "your choice to fly with us again is the greatest vote of confidence I could hope for, and one I know we have yet to fully earn. I hope this journey is the first of many that reflects the better airline you have inspired us to become. Yours sincerely, Robert Stanfield." Alistair folded the note and placed it in her briefcase. It was a good start. After takeoff, Annika approached. "Dr. Vance, may I get you something to drink before dinner?" Here it was, the moment of truth. "Yes, thank you, Annika." Alistair said, her voice steady. "I would love a glass of the Maison Auray rose." Annika's expression didn't flicker. Instead, a look of profound understanding settled on her face. She gave a small, respectful nod. "Of course. It would be our absolute honor." She paused, then added in a lower, more personal tone, "Dr. Vance, if you'll permit me to say, your experience on Flight 712 is something we all learned from. It's now the central case study in our empathy and service training. The story is called The Auray Audit. It's about listening to our passengers and, more importantly, seeing them. We are all better at our jobs because of you." Alistair was taken aback. She had expected politeness, efficiency, compliance. She had not expected her painful experience to be codified, named, and transformed into a cornerstone of their pedagogy. She had not expected to be seen as a teacher. A wave of complex emotion washed over her vindication sadness for the necessity of it all, and a reluctant flicker of pride. "Thank you for telling me that, Annika," she said quietly. The champagne was presented perfectly. Annika showed her the bottle, uncorked it with a gentle sigh, and poured the rosé into a delicate fluted glass. The bubbles rose a vibrant stream of life. This time, when the glass was placed before her, it felt different. It was not a concession. It was an offering. As she worked during the flight, Alistair reflected on the aftermath. The story of what happened had never been leaked to the press, a testament to Stanfield's swift and discreet handling of the crisis. But within the industry, whispers travelled. Maison Aurai's sales had more than tripled. The Elysian deal had given them unparalleled prestige, and the quiet buzz about Tara's sudden passionate embrace of her brand had only amplified its allure. She had never wanted her brand to be defined by a struggle against racism, but she couldn't deny that the story in its own way had become part of its powerful mystique. It was a brand that had demanded and received respect at 30,000 feet. She thought briefly of Brenda Gregory and Keith. She felt no malice toward them, only a distant pity. They were cogs in a broken machine, individuals who had allowed their own biases to become their professional downfall. Their fate was a necessary consequence, a painful but essential course correction. Later, as the cabin was dark and quiet, Alistair raised the glass to her lips and took a sip. The taste was familiar, and exquisite notes of wild strawberry, a hint of toasted brioche, a crisp, clean finish. But layered within it was a new flavor, something more complex. It tasted of accountability. It tasted of progress. It tasted like a victory that was not just hers, but belonged to every person who had ever been made to feel invisible. She looked out the window at the endless expanse of stars against the velvet blackness. The gilded cage was gone. In its place was simply a window, a portal to a world she was actively, powerfully reshaping. The journey was long, and there was still a great distance to go. But tonight, flying high above the clouds, Alistair Vance was finally truly on her way. So what's the real takeaway from Dr. Alistair Vance's story? It's a powerful reminder that prejudice often wears a polite uniform and a practiced smile. It's not always a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's a quiet, insidious denial of service, a subtle message that you don't belong. But Alistair's story is also a masterclass in how to fight back, not with rage, but with intelligence documentation and the undeniable power of her own success. She turned a humiliating incident into a catalyst for profound, systemic change. The flight crew thought they were dealing with just another passenger they could ignore. They had no idea they were trying to sideline the very person whose excellence they were meant to be celebrating. Karma in this story wasn't just a satisfying twist, it was a corporate restructuring. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of quiet strength and a well-served reckoning, then please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel. We're dedicated to bringing you more true stories, where the final verdict is delivered not in a courtroom, but by the undeniable force of karma. Click that notification bell because you won't want to miss the next flight.